It was one of those days no husband ever wants to see coming. My wife of 23 years, Tiffany, calmly announced that she was planning to start dating other men, starting tonight. I found myself sitting in our kitchen, gripping a glass of monkey shoulder scotch, feeling completely lost. For a solid 10 minutes, I didn't take a single sip. Instead, I just stared blankly, as if the whole world around me had suddenly frozen in place. I couldn't hear, couldn't see, only this deep, raw ache welling up inside me, a kind of pain I knew no amount of booze or medicine could ever numb. I'd heard stories, rumors really, about husbands whose wives decided they wanted to see other men. I'd always laughed it off, thinking it was just an urban myth, the kind of thing that only happened to other folks, people whose marriages weren't built on the same kind of love and trust as ours. But here I was, living that exact nightmare. Tiffany was supposed to be my teammate, my anchor, the one person I thought I could count on no matter what. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. How could she even think of doing this? How could she be willing to toss aside everything we'd built together for her own wants? The day itself had been nothing special, just an ordinary, pleasant one. I left work at 5, whistling as I stepped through the front door. I was in a good mood, ready to relax. There was Tiffany, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of red wine, looking calm, almost as if she'd been waiting for me. Her relaxed demeanor struck me as odd, like there was something there I couldn't quite put my finger on, but I ignored it. I set down my briefcase, poured myself a good 3 fingers of scotch, and took a seat across from her. She was watching me with this little glint in her eye, a playful, almost mischievous smile. I raised an eyebrow. "What's going on, Tiffany?" I asked, curious but not prepared for what was coming next. Her smile softened into something more serious as she held my gaze. "Mark," she started, her voice steady and controlled, "do you think I've been a good wife and mother all these years?" The question caught me off guard. It wasn't like her to ask things like that, and I could tell she meant it. After a pause, I answered as honestly as I could. "Yeah, I'd say you have." She tilted her head, still holding my gaze. "And don't you think I deserve a little credit for that?" I shifted in my chair, trying to figure out where this was heading. "Tiffany, do you think I should get a pat on the back for being a good husband and father? What exactly are you getting at?" She took a deep breath, looking as serene as a calm lake at dawn. "Tonight, I want to go out with another man." Her words hit me like a sucker punch straight to the gut. My brain went blank, my stomach churned, and I just sat there, stunned, trying to make sense of what she had said. She watched me with that same calm expression, like she knew exactly what I was thinking and had already made peace with it. She nodded slowly. "Yes, Mark. I want to go out with someone else. After 24 years of being only yours, I feel like I've earned the right to explore. I'm 47 now, and I know I won't have this kind of appeal forever. I want to feel what it's like to still have options." I was completely blindsided, my jaw practically on the floor. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But she just kept staring at me, her face set, her mind made up. "Damn," I mumbled under my breath. She stood up then and headed upstairs. I could hear her rummaging around, changing her clothes. When she came back down, it was like she'd transformed into a vision that was both breathtaking and terrifying to me. She had on a sleek black dress that hugged her body in all the right ways, with a cutout that offered just enough to make any man look twice. The hem barely grazed her mid-thigh, and she wore it like it was made just for her. Her makeup was light, but she'd pulled her long blonde hair back into a high ponytail, highlighting her features. She looked every bit as stunning as the first day I'd seen her, and it left me feeling a mix of awe and dread all at once. "I'm not letting this happen, Tiffany," I said, getting to my feet and stepping in front of her, blocking her way. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're not leaving this house dressed like that, not while you're still my wife." She gave me a look, her smile twisting into something almost mocking. "Mark, you're not going to stop me." You know as well as I do that you're not going to divorce me over this. Where would you even find another woman like me? And if we end up splitting, you know the kids will blame you for tearing our family apart. Just let me have my fun tonight, and then it'll be back to you and me, growing old together like we always planned. I couldn't believe how sure of herself she sounded, like she knew she held all the power in the situation. She leaned in, attempting to kiss me goodbye, but I jerked away, feeling as though she'd slapped me across the face. For a brief moment, her expression changed, from surprise to something like hurt, but it quickly hardened into a cold, indifferent mask. Maybe I'll come back, she said flatly before turning and walking out the door. I stood there, unable to move, watching her leave, my whole world crumbling in that single, impossible moment. She didn't even glance back, and I was left standing there, my mind flooded with memories of Tiffany's beauty and how it had shaped her life. From the time she was a teenager, she was the kind of girl who could get just about anything she wanted with a simple smile or a flutter of her eyelashes. She'd figured out early on that her looks weren't just luck, they were a kind of power she could wield, and she used that power with ease. I remember the very first time I saw her. My family had just moved to a new town right before I started 8th grade. On my first day at the new school, I walked into the hallway, and there she was, laughing with her friends, like she belonged in a completely different league. Even back then, she had this natural elegance that made her stand out from everyone else. I was immediately smitten. It took me a while to build up the nerve, but I finally asked her out in high school, and to my surprise, she said yes. We became that inseparable couple, always together, but there were plenty of other guys who had their eyes on her too. By junior year, she left me for David Miller, a popular football player with the looks and charm to match. At the time, I was just a skinny kid trying to figure myself out, and I knew I couldn't compete with him. By the time we reached senior year, I had grown a few inches and put on some muscle, but it still wasn't enough to measure up to David or the image of the kind of guy Tiffany seemed to prefer. I ended up going to prom with a girl who was sweet and kind, but she wasn't Tiffany. Meanwhile, Tiffany was there in her prom queen's tiara, standing beside the prom king, David, of course, the perfect couple everyone admired. Tiffany's beauty wasn't just a gift, it was her weapon, her ticket to getting whatever she wanted. For the lucky guys who got to be with her, the charm and affection she offered came effortlessly, and I was no different. From the very start, she had me wrapped around her little finger, and I hadn't realized just how tightly until now. After high school, I went off to the University of Minnesota to major in accounting. Those 4 years were a blur of classes, part-time jobs, and the occasional date, though nothing serious ever came of them. Meanwhile, Tiffany went to Minnesota State University for a degree in marketing. College was a different world for her, she dated around, and from what I heard later on, she didn't hold back when it came to exploring the dating scene. She even had a fling with one of her marketing professors, which conveniently helped bump her grade from a B to an A. By that point, she'd mastered the art of getting exactly what she wanted. By pure coincidence, we both ended up landing jobs in Duluth after graduation. Nearly a year after settling into our new routines, I found myself out on a Friday night with some coworkers at a popular bar and grill. We were chatting, laughing, and sharing a few rounds of drinks when Tiffany walked in with a couple of friends. She wore a tight green dress with a plunging neckline that was impossible to ignore. Heads turned as she entered the room, she had that kind of presence. It was like she knew exactly how to make every eye in the place focus on her. James Smith, one of my co-workers, was the first to break the silence at our table. "Who is that goddess?" he practically shouted, eyes glued to her. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Guys, meet Tiffany, the goddess herself and my middle school sweetheart." Heads around the table swiveled toward me in shock. "Wait, you know her?" one of them asked, wide-eyed. I winced a bit, not keen on being the center of attention. "Yeah, we were close at 14, but once high school started, I became invisible, and she ignored me the entire 4 years." That earned a few laughs around the table, and one of the women nudged me playfully. Any juicy stories from back then, she teased. I chuckled awkwardly, hoping to steer the conversation away, but Tiffany must have noticed the exchange. She glanced over, her eyes narrowing slightly, like she almost recognized me. Her friend sat down at a table nearby, and I realized she was now facing us. James nudged me with his elbow, whispering, "Come on, man, why don't you go say hi? You're practically drooling." Casey, another colleague, chimed in. "Yeah, just go for it, or at least stop staring." I shook my head. She pretended not to know me for all of high school. I doubt she'd remember me now. I tried to play it cool, but I couldn't deny the small thrill of seeing her again. Meanwhile, Tiffany kept glancing our way, and finally, as if a light bulb clicked, she snapped her fingers and pointed. "Mark," she called out, getting up and making her way over. There was no mistaking the recognition this time. She walked up with that effortless confidence, a broad smile on her face. "Mark," she exclaimed, sounding bubbly. "So happy to see you." I forced a smile, rolling my eyes at my coworkers before standing up to greet her. "Tiffany, it's nice to see you," I said, doing my best to keep a neutral tone. But she wasn't done making a scene. Before I could react, she wrapped an arm around me and kissed me square on the lips. I was stunned, and judging by their faces, so were my colleagues. Tiffany flashed me a smile, clearly aware of the stir she'd caused and enjoying every second of it. I could tell she was relishing the power she still had over me. "Come on, join us at our table," she said, grabbing my hand and practically pulling me along. I ended up spending the rest of the evening with Tiffany and her two friends, doing my best to keep things light and casual. She was her usual charming self, flirting and giving me these sly looks, even stealing a few more kisses. I didn't react the way I knew she wanted. I kept my focus split between her and her friends, which seemed to intrigue her even more. By the end of the night, she had slipped her number into my phone, and we exchanged contacts before parting ways. The following Monday, my coworkers bombarded me with questions about Tiffany. "Man, she's something else," James said, still sounding awestruck. "How did you end up leaving so early?" I shrugged. "Look, she's impressive, but she's way out of my league. I'm not signing up for that kind of drama." But I wasn't quite done with Tiffany. 2 days later, I found her waiting by my car after work. She was dressed in an outfit that was a size too small, flaunting everything she had. My pulse quickened as I walked up, reminding myself to stay calm. "Why didn't you call, Mark?" she murmured, her voice soft and sultry. I tried to keep my eyes from wandering, but it was impossible. Her blouse was unbuttoned just enough to draw attention, and her skirt barely covered what it needed to. "Damn," I muttered under my breath, trying to steady myself as she leaned in, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me with a passion that left no room for doubt. She pressed her body against mine, and my hands instinctively found her waist, one of them accidentally grazing her bare backside as her dress hiked up. She slipped her tongue into my mouth, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. When we finally pulled apart, she adjusted her dress with a coy smile, flashing a look at the coworkers who drove past, likely wondering what they'd just witnessed. We decided to head to a restaurant on the edge of town for dinner. It was a nice meal, but I couldn't help noticing how she kept tugging at her dress, which amused both me and the waitress. Despite everything, a part of me stayed cautious around Tiffany. I knew the kind of spell she could cast. But when we made it back to her place and she slipped out of her clothes, I couldn't resist. She looked like the goddess I remembered, and I told myself that if this was my only shot, I was going to make the most of it. As we lay there, she gazed into my eyes with a playful grin. "I made a huge mistake years ago," she whispered, gently brushing her hand across my cheek. "You're amazing, Mark. I can't believe we wasted so much time apart." That night, something reignited between us. Despite not being on her level looks-wise, Tiffany seemed to see potential in me. I was fit, motivated, and, in her eyes, had proven my worth in ways that truly mattered. As we started spending more and more time together, I realized I was falling for the woman behind that beautiful face. Eventually, I picked out an engagement ring, but I knew we needed to have a serious conversation first. One evening over dinner, I placed a small black box on the table and looked her square in the eye. "The past is the past," I said, taking a deep breath. "But from here on out, I want complete exclusivity between us, no exceptions. If you can't promise that, I need to know right now." Tiffany locked eyes with me, her expression turning serious as she glanced at the box. "I would never betray my husband. Never," she vowed as I slowly opened the box. For years, I clung to those words. As far as I knew, she'd stayed faithful, turning down any tempting opportunities that came her way. She was a perfect 10, maybe even a 12, and I was lucky if I was a 6 on a good day. I was grateful, believing she was my one and only. When I said I loved her, I meant it for life, not just for 23 years. But now, looking back, I couldn't help but wonder if she still felt the same way. Every week, she'd still catch the attention of men, and occasionally, even women. Tiffany knew she was something special, a rare beauty that stood out even among the merely attractive, and for 23 years, she had been my whole world. In the early days, we'd joke about how she'd tell me anytime someone hit on her. She was all about honesty back then, making sure I knew about every bit of unwanted attention she got. Eventually, I told her it wasn't necessary anymore. I trusted her completely. I just asked that she let me know if anyone didn't take no for an answer, so I could step in if needed. As for me, women hardly ever approached. My wedding ring was like a shield, and the moment I met a new woman, I'd casually mention Tiffany and the kids. I figured it was better to set clear boundaries right from the start, though Tiffany never seemed to notice how quickly I shut down any hints of flirtation. For years, it felt like we had a picture-perfect marriage, until a new face appeared at Tiffany's PR firm, Natalie Jones. Natalie looked like she'd stepped right out of a music video, with thick dark hair, big brown eyes, and a figure that turned heads wherever she went. She worked as Tiffany's assistant at Superior Solutions and didn't shy away from flaunting her looks or sharing stories of her wild romances outside of marriage. Even though Natalie had been married for 15 years, she openly talked about her escapades, painting vivid pictures of her passionate affairs. One afternoon during coffee, Natalie leaned in closer to Tiffany and asked, "So, you've never stepped out of line? Come on, you look like the perfect wife, but don't you ever crave a little something extra?" Tiffany laughed it off, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm curious, sure, but I could never betray Mark." But recently, I'd noticed Tiffany feeling a bit insecure. When we went out, the attention she once commanded had started shifting toward younger women. It clearly bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Natalie, seeing an opening, leaned in even closer. "Let's play a little what-if game. What if Mark gave you the green light, would that change your mind?" Tiffany's expression softened, her eyes glinting with a trace of curiosity, as if she was considering the possibility for the first time. "I guess if he gave me his blessing, yeah, it might change things," she said with a sly smile. Natalie chuckled and gave a knowing nod. "Then maybe you should ask. Everything worth having is worth asking for." Tiffany seemed unsure at first, but I noticed a spark of intrigue in her eyes. "Mark would never agree to that," she said, shaking her head. Natalie's eyes lit up with mischief. "Then convince him. Tell him, and if he loves you as much as you say he does, he'll understand. Besides, you're not looking for love, you've got that with Mark. You just want a little excitement." At that exact moment, I was jolted awake by the sound of a car pulling into our driveway. It was past 3 a.m. I glanced at the half-empty bottle of Woodford Reserve beside me just as Tiffany walked in. She looked disheveled, her hair was messy, makeup smudged, and her clothes wrinkled. There was a strange look on her face, almost like a smug satisfaction. "Good night, was it?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm as I watched her walk in. Tiffany rolled her eyes. You didn't need to wait up, she replied, heading straight for the stairs. Good night to you, too. Let's get one thing clear, though, if this is how it's going to go, I'm done waiting around for you. She threw me a sharp look but didn't say a word, continuing her climb up to the bedroom. I poured myself another drink and settled back into the recliner, turning on ESPN, though I barely registered what was playing. By morning, I'd had a restless sleep. As I made breakfast, I heard the sound of the shower running upstairs. Normally, Tiffany would come down wrapped in a robe, hair in a towel, but today she was fully dressed, makeup done, looking ready to take on the day. She glanced around the kitchen before meeting my gaze. Did you leave anything for me to eat? She asked coolly. I gestured toward the coffee pot. There's coffee. You can handle the rest yourself. I paused, looking her directly in the eyes. Since we're both here, we need to talk. Tiffany's eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by the firmness in my voice. It seemed she had expected me to be either furious or withdrawn, not calm and composed. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Don't you want to know how my night went? She asked, a hint of amusement in her tone. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay level-headed. No, I don't care about that. What I need to know is where you see this marriage going from here. She took a deep breath, her voice oddly casual, as if discussing weekend plans. Mark, like I said yesterday, I want to explore for a bit. I'm not looking for love with anyone else, that's reserved for us. But I crave the thrill of something new. You're amazing, but I need a little variety. I want to enjoy what's out there while I still can. Afterward, it'll just be us again, growing old together. I'll be yours completely, but for now, I need this. I listened in disbelief, my hands busy spreading butter on toast while she talked about our future as if it were just another casual conversation over breakfast. My mind raced with questions, but I managed to voice only a few. So, this is all about variety? I asked, my voice strained. Am I not enough for you? Before she could answer, I continued, so, you're suggesting an open marriage, only to go back to being monogamous later. And that offer would extend to me too, right? I'd be free to date other people. Tiffany let out a short laugh, as if the idea amused her. The thought of her mild-mannered husband playing the field was apparently laughable to her, but she nodded, clearly willing to make that compromise. Sure, if that's what it takes for you to agree. But I'd expect it to be purely physical on your end, no emotional attachments. I raised my eyebrows and gave a slight shrug. She didn't seem to understand the gesture, though I could tell she had an inkling of its meaning. Her expression brightened a bit as she added, actually, there's Natalie, my friend from work. She's great, and I'm pretty sure she'd be interested. I could even set you two up sometime. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. A small, reckless part of me was tempted by the idea, but I knew I wasn't that man anymore. I shook my head. Thanks for the offer, Tiffany, but no. That would make me just as much of a cheater as you were last night. Her smug smile twisted into an angry scowl. I am not a cheater, she snapped. If you say so, I replied, holding her gaze without flinching. But that doesn't mean I agree to any of this. Her eyes narrowed as she stared back at me. You'll come around, Mark. I'm going to do this with or without your permission. Monday morning arrived, and by 11 a.m., Natalie was already in Tiffany's office. It didn't take her long to pick up on Tiffany's sour mood. Tiffany mumbled something about me being closed-minded, clearly irritated. Natalie glanced over her shoulder, then shut the office door behind her with a knowing look. So he turned down a date with me, huh? Honestly, I didn't expect to be part of the offer, but I figured I was irresistible, Natalie said with a smirk, striking a pose and gesturing playfully to herself. Tiffany managed a faint smile, but I knew better, she was fuming inside, and Natalie's encouragement only fueled her frustration. "So, how was the date? Did you have a good time, or did Mark manage to spoil it?" Natalie asked with a teasing grin. Tiffany chuckled, clearly satisfied. "Oh, Carlos knows how to treat a woman right. It's been ages since I was with anyone else, and I really enjoyed the change of pace. So, who do you think I should go after next?" They both burst out laughing. I had avoided bringing up divorce, holding on to the hope that she'd come to her senses and abandon this reckless path. I genuinely believed we could move past this if she just decided to stop. My optimism flickered a bit when she skipped a date the following week. We were still sleeping in separate rooms and barely speaking, but I thought maybe there was a chance she was rethinking everything. Then, the next Friday rolled around, and she appeared once more, all dressed up and ready for another night out. My heart sank. "Seriously, Tiffany? You're doing this again?" I asked, sharper than I meant to. "Is it the same guy, or are you moving on to someone new this time?" Tiffany shot me a look of pure annoyance. "Did you even listen to what I've been saying? This isn't about you, Mark. It's about me wanting to live a little while I still have the chance. I'm not losing interest in you, I just crave variety. I get pursued constantly, and for once, I want to indulge. But I'll always come back to you," she added, as if that made everything better. "What if I don't want you to come back?" I said, my voice firm. "I can't just sit by while you go out and have your fun with other men. This isn't what I agreed to. I won't be the guy who watches his wife parade around with half the men in town. Maybe I could stomach it once, but twice. That's outright betrayal." She rolled her eyes and wiggled her fingers at me in a mocking gesture. "Oh, please, Mark. You don't really want to lose me. It doesn't have to be all or nothing." The very next day, I contacted my lawyer to start drafting divorce papers, even though deep down, I hoped I wouldn't have to go through with it. My plan was to have a serious discussion with Tiffany on Monday, but first, I needed to talk to our daughters. When I broke the news, neither Hannah, 21, nor Grace, 19, seemed all that surprised. As the conversation went on, it became clear that Hannah might have known what was happening all along. "You knew she was heading down this road and didn't say a word to me?" I asked, stunned. "Dad, I was in a tough spot," Hannah admitted, her voice strained. "No matter what I did, one of you would have been upset with me. Besides, it's her body, not yours." "Don't start with that, Hannah," I said, struggling to keep my cool. "I understand it was hard for you, but don't act like she has free rein to do whatever she wants without consequences. We made vows, there were commitments." "I'm sorry, Dad," she murmured, her voice filled with regret. Tiffany came home around 2 a.m. that night, an hour earlier than the last time, but she looked just as disheveled. I wasn't there to witness it, I had already left hours before, but I could easily imagine the smug look she wore, returning from another man's embrace. Later, I found out she had been with Carlos Hernandez, a big, strong guy who left her barely able to move. She even boasted about how incredible the night had been. But when she opened a letter at work on Monday morning and saw the divorce papers, Tiffany crumbled. She broke down in tears, rushing to the restroom, where Natalie soon found her. "You had to know he'd serve you with papers eventually," Natalie said, giving a casual shrug. "Men can be so petty sometimes. They love to get back at you. Give him a week or so, he'll cool down." Tiffany wiped away her tears, trying to regain her composure. She walked back to her desk, grabbed her phone, and dialed my number without hesitation. "How could you do this, Mark? And at my workplace, of all places. I know you're upset, but I deserved better than this," she sobbed into the phone. "Tiffany, after 23 years together, don't I deserve better than you unilaterally deciding to open up our marriage?" I shot back, barely able to contain my frustration. "If you thought I wasn't right for you anymore, couldn't we have ended things civilly instead of this mess?" I don't want civility or a divorce, Mark. I still love you, she cried, her voice breaking. Maybe you do love me, I said through clenched teeth, but every time you choose to be with someone else, a part of my love for you fades. I thought my love for you was endless, but it turns out we were both wrong. Despite the strain between us, Tiffany moved forward with the divorce process. Her lawyer suggested marriage counseling, and though I was reluctant, I agreed to give it a try. When we arrived at the counselor's office, I was surprised to see Patricia Collins, a well-known therapist who had a reputation for trying to reconcile couples, often leaning in favor of the wife. I couldn't help but wonder how that would play out this time. Let's start with the basics, Patricia said calmly. Mrs. Brown, did you inform your husband of your intention to date other men before you acted on it? Tiffany shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly uneasy. Yes, I did, she answered quietly. Patricia's expression hardened. So you wanted this arrangement solely for yourself, without any regard for how it would affect your husband? Tiffany's face darkened with frustration. Yes, that's what I wanted, but it doesn't mean I don't care about him. Patricia's eyes were cold and unyielding. If you believe for a second that this behavior is justifiable, you're fooling yourself. You should feel ashamed, but clearly, you don't. Tiffany sat there, stunned and speechless. Over the next month, she called me almost every day and sent countless text messages, but I ignored nearly all of them. By then, I had moved into a small apartment nearby, trying to distance myself from the chaos. Eventually, she turned to our daughters, asking them to reach out on her behalf. Dad, do you still love Mom? Grace asked me one evening over the phone. If she stopped seeing other men, would you be willing to give her another chance? Wait, she's still seeing other guys? I asked, my voice shaking. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. After that conversation, Grace never called again to push for reconciliation. Word of our divorce spread quickly, and I was taken aback by the number of single women at work who reached out, offering their sympathy and support. Even some mutual friends, like Gabriella White, contacted me. Gabriella had known Tiffany and me for years, but I never expected the shift in her tone when we met for lunch one afternoon. I would never have pursued a friend's husband, Gabriella said, leaning in slightly. But now that you're single, well, things have changed. I'm interested in you, Mark, she confessed, catching me completely off guard. I felt a mix of surprise and flattery, managing a smile. But technically, I'm not single just yet, Gabriella. I won't start anything new until the divorce is final. Call me old-fashioned, but I'm not about to cheat. Gabriella chuckled softly. You're such a Boy Scout, Mark. That's one of the things I've always admired about you. She hesitated briefly before adding, but once things are settled, could we go out sometime? Sure, I agreed, though I knew it might complicate her relationship with Tiffany. I wouldn't want to mess up your friendship with her. You two have a long history. She waved off my concern. I appreciate that, but I'm not going to let a good opportunity slip by just because it's a bit unconventional. She gave me a playful smile. Maybe I'll give you a call once you're officially off the market. Gabriella was an impressive woman, tall, fit, with long, shiny black hair and a sharp, witty sense of humor. I couldn't deny I was interested, even if her boldness caught me off guard. Staying true to my word, I reached out to her on the day the divorce was finalized. We went out for dinner that Saturday night, followed by a visit to a cozy jazz club. Sensing my discomfort, Gabriella grinned and teased, I feel like I'm out with a teenager on his very first date. It's been over 26 years since I've been on a date with anyone other than Tiffany, I confessed, laughing at my own awkwardness. Oh, so does that mean the condom in your wallet is the same one you had before Tiffany? She quipped, raising an eyebrow. I couldn't help but laugh, feeling my face flush. I didn't even think about that. By the end of the night, we shared a sweet, gentle kiss that left us both smiling. I promised I'd call her again soon. Taking off my wedding ring that day hadn't felt like a huge moment to me, but apparently, it was a big deal to some of the single women at the office. Once they noticed, the flirting noticeably ramped up. This was all new territory for me, and during lunch one day, I confided in my best friend at work, James. "Man, there are so many attractive women here," I admitted. "How did I not notice any of this before?" James burst out laughing and shook his head. "Because you were the definition of a henpecked husband, completely head over heels, so much that you didn't even glance at anyone else. Sure, Tiffany's gorgeous, but you handed over all the power to her. Maybe that's part of what went wrong." In that first month after the divorce, I went on 4 different dates, including 2 more with Gabriella. While I hadn't taken things further initially, by the second month, I ended up sleeping with 2 different women. My daughters, who were still closer with Tiffany than with me, had heard her bragging that while she could have any man she wanted, I was supposedly struggling to find anyone interested. 2 months after the divorce, my daughters surprised me with a visit on a Saturday morning. I had entertained a guest the night before, Kelly, a 25-year-old who needed a date for a wedding. We'd had a great night, and she ended up staying over. I hadn't even thought to set an alarm. When I opened the door at 8:36 a.m., there stood Hannah and Grace, smiling and holding bags of breakfast. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to look a bit more awake as they stepped inside. "Hey, Dad. Mind if we join you for breakfast?" Hannah chirped, unpacking bagels and cream cheese. I was busy pouring coffee when Kelly made her appearance, wearing one of my shirts, half-buttoned, clearly without a bra, and her hair still tousled from sleep. Kelly gave us a sleepy smile. "Didn't realize we had company, babe," she said, planting a quick kiss on my lips. My daughters stood there in stunned silence, their cheeks turning red as Kelly casually grabbed a mug and poured herself some coffee. "No, Kelly, these are my daughters, Hannah and Grace," I stammered, gesturing awkwardly to introduce them. "Oh, nice to meet you both," Kelly laughed, sliding into the chair next to me, her arm brushing against mine. Hannah and Grace tried to play it cool, but I could see the unspoken questions brewing. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. "So, Dad, how are things with Mom?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of hesitation. My mood shifted immediately, the bitterness rising to the surface. A few minutes earlier, Kelly's presence had felt like an escape, but now I found myself feeling awkward with her beside me. Grace spoke up softly. "We thought you might be missing Mom by now." I shook my head, unable to mask the lingering hurt. I was her anchor, but she's moved on. "She's been having company in our old bed, sometimes 2 at a time," I muttered bitterly. Hannah's eyes went wide in shock, while Kelly burst out laughing. "So, how many guys has she been with since the split?" "I mean, even if it's just 2 a month for 10 months, that's 20 guys." "3 a month would make it 30, she remarked, amused. My daughters shot her a look that could kill, clearly not amused by Kelly's bluntness. "It's not my fault if someone else can't keep their legs shut," Kelly said with a shrug. "Let's not ruin a good breakfast," I cut in, trying to steer the conversation back to neutral ground. "Sorry, Dad," they mumbled, exchanging glances with each other and then looking at Kelly. Hannah finally asked, "So, are you two a thing?" Kelly laughed. "Oh, don't worry, I'm just friends with your dad. He's a great guy, but I'm not planning on becoming anyone's stepmom. We're just 2 people enjoying each other's company, nothing more." "Yeah, we know he's a good guy," Hannah said, giving me a playful smile. "Even if he's a bit of an idiot sometimes." Kelly grinned, blushing slightly. "He is pretty cute, even if he's old enough to be your dad," she teased, glancing over at me. She turned to me with a smile. "Hey, don't forget we've got lunch with the newlyweds at noon." "I need to head home and grab some clothes," she said, standing up. My daughters rolled their eyes as Kelly got up to leave. A few weeks later, during lunch with Tiffany, Hannah casually mentioned Kelly. She's my age, Mom, and it doesn't look like a one-time fling. They've been spending a lot of time together. I don't think he'll be coming back to you anytime soon. Tiffany's face tightened. He probably just caught her on a good day, she snapped. She's probably just a loose woman who'll sleep with anyone. Hannah's tone sharpened as she replied, Dad's a good man, Mom. He's no player. But at some point, everything became about you. Was it really worth it? For the first time, Tiffany's face went pale, her confident demeanor crumbling. She couldn't admit it out loud, but things weren't going as smoothly as she'd let on. In her chats with Natalie, she bragged about her flings and adventures, but privately, she hadn't expected me to move on so quickly, or that other women would actually find me attractive. She'd assumed I'd spend my days pining for her, not dating. Now, not only had I moved on, but I was seeing multiple women, including Gabriella, her own friend. Tiffany found out by chance and initially assumed it was just a one-time date. But when she heard about a second outing, she was furious. She confronted Gabriella in a cafe, practically cornering her. I thought we were friends. Tiffany yelled, her voice trembling with anger. You're supposed to be on my side. Gabriella remained calm, unaffected by Tiffany's outburst. Tiffany, he didn't betray you. Mark is a great guy, exactly the kind of man I've been looking for. Why shouldn't I date him? There are plenty of women interested in Mark, he's a genuine catch and a true gentleman. Tiffany was left speechless, suddenly realizing how much she had taken for granted. The reality of her situation was sinking in, she might have made a mistake she couldn't undo. For the first time, she felt the full weight of loneliness, the emptiness of returning to a quiet, empty home each night. The prospect of sleeping alone, something she once dismissed, now filled her with dread. Meanwhile, my life had become more active and fulfilling than I ever could have imagined. I used to be content with my simple, predictable routine, but things had changed drastically. Work was going well, my social calendar was packed, and I found myself enjoying the company of women from different walks of life. I wasn't actively searching for a serious relationship, but I appreciated the new variety and excitement life had brought my way. One particularly memorable date was with Linda Green, an elegant woman with shoulder-length silver hair streaked with a touch of purple. She had on a Milwaukee Brewers cap pulled over her ponytail, paired with a snug blue Brewers shirt and light jeans that showed off her fit, youthful figure. Linda was 60 but carried herself with a vibrance that turned heads as we made our way through American Family Field for a baseball game. I had known Linda for over 15 years, having crossed paths at various company events. I always thought you were handsome and kind, Linda confessed when she first reached out to me. She had lost her husband in a car accident 5 years earlier and hadn't dated much since, but eventually decided to give me a call. I remembered her well, she was the type of woman who exudes both elegance and charm. When she asked me to dinner, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Our first date was a few months ago. We had dinner at a fancy restaurant before heading to a Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra performance. Linda had snagged great seats for us. That evening ended with a sweet kiss at her doorstep. For our second date, we went hiking on a Saturday. I'd thought I was in good shape, but Linda, a seasoned hiker, kept up a brisk pace while I found myself needing breaks. Her fit physique was impressive, and her striking gray eyes were hard to look away from. That night ended with a passionate moment back at her place, a connection that felt both intimate and thrilling. For our third date, I suggested a weekend sightseeing trip around Milwaukee, which Linda was excited to join. During the outing, she made it clear she had no plans to tell Tiffany about our relationship. She wouldn't lie if asked, but she didn't see a reason to broadcast it. Apparently, Tiffany had told their coworkers that we divorced due to irreconcilable differences, a sanitized version of the truth. I kept my explanation simple too. I mentioned that Tiffany had been unfaithful with at least 2 men, though I spared everyone the details. 2 years after the divorce, I had established several meaningful relationships and was enjoying a lively social life. Many of the women I dated genuinely appreciated me and saw potential in what we could build together, though I wasn't in a rush to settle down. I wanted to rebuild my trust in relationships and, maybe someday, consider marriage again. Tiffany, however, wasn't interested in forming any deep connections. Long before we separated, she had told me outright that she was only in it for the physical thrills. The stark difference between us, me seeking companionship and her chasing fleeting excitement, highlighted why we were ultimately better off apart. The differences between Tiffany and me became a challenge for our daughter Hannah, who was in the midst of planning her wedding, an event I was funding. Tiffany had suggested to Hannah that both of us should attend the wedding without dates to avoid any potential drama. Although Hannah wasn't thrilled about it, she brought the idea up to me during a lunch meeting. "Whose idea is this, yours or your mother's?" I asked, narrowing my eyes suspiciously. Hannah let out a sigh. "Mom thinks it'll be simpler this way, you know, to avoid any unnecessary tension." I shook my head firmly. "I'm paying for this wedding, and I intend to enjoy it, with a date by my side. I even took dance lessons for this occasion, and I plan to use them. There's no but about it, Hannah. If your mom wants to come solo, that's fine. If she wants a date, that's fine too. But I'm bringing a date, and I don't want to hear another word about it." Hannah nodded, seeing my point. "Okay, Dad. I'll talk to her. And I can't wait to see those dance moves. Just, maybe bring someone closer to your age." I chuckled. "We'll see. But you'd better get used to the idea of seeing me and Kelly out on the dance floor." When the big day arrived, I brought Gabriella White as my date. We had a minor disagreement over the sea green dress I'd picked out for her, but I wanted her to have something new, and she eventually wore it. Walking Hannah down the aisle was just as emotional as I had anticipated, a mix of pride and a bittersweet sense of joy. It was a beautiful day, and as I looked around, I felt deeply grateful for everything that had brought me to this moment. The reception was lively, and Gabriella, the kids, and I danced well into the night. The only tense moment came when Tiffany arrived with her own date. I wasn't fazed by it, but throughout the evening, her date acted like an obnoxious drunk, leering at me and even ogling several other women. When Hannah asked her to handle it, Tiffany quickly escorted him out, clearly embarrassed. Later, I ran into Tiffany and Gabriella in the hallway near the restrooms. Tiffany, visibly upset, confronted Gabriella, accusing her of stealing me away. Gabriella stayed calm and unflustered. "Mark divorced you long before we started dating," she replied softly, stepping past Tiffany without further confrontation, determined not to spoil Hannah's special day. Months after the wedding, Grace stopped by my place looking uneasy. I could tell something was weighing on her mind, so I asked, "What's going on, Grace? You've been on edge the whole evening." Her cheeks flushed slightly. Dad, you know sometimes Mom talks about wanting to reconcile. She says she plans to win you back once she's done with her dating phase." She hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I guess I just wanted to know if you two had gotten close again or anything." I stiffened. "Grace, my personal life isn't really your business. But if you're asking, then no, I haven't been with your mother." "What's this about?" Grace looked away for a moment before speaking again, her voice low. "Well, the thing is, Dad, Mom has an STD. I overheard her telling a friend she was treated for syphilis." I was stunned into silence, feeling a wave of shock wash over me. Grace watched my reaction, clearly noticing the sadness in my eyes. "I appreciate you telling me, sweetheart," I said, my tone softer. "But it's standard practice to inform any partners so they can get tested too." "I didn't know that," she admitted quietly. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. It's hard to hear people talk about her, you know." A few days later, I got a call from Linda, sounding concerned. She'd heard the rumors circulating about Tiffany, and I could tell she was worried about her own health. "If you're wondering, no, I haven't been with Tiffany, I reassured her. I get why you're uneasy, but there's nothing I can do about the choices she's made. Linda sighed heavily. Her life has turned into a soap opera, to say the least, she remarked. It seems the longer she stays single, the less she cares about the consequences. Months went by, and the buzz around Tiffany's STD scare started to fade. That's when she began plotting a reconciliation, convinced that I'd been missing her and would eventually want her back. In her mind, I could never really leave her. She believed no one else could compare to her allure, assuming she was irreplaceable. She might have been right if I hadn't already moved on with other women. Confident in her beauty, she couldn't wrap her head around the idea that I might actually find happiness elsewhere. I know he's great, but these women must be out of their minds if they think he's on my level, she complained to Natalie over margaritas one evening, clearly annoyed by the attention I was receiving. Yet, even Tiffany couldn't ignore the truth. My life after the divorce had been fulfilling, while hers had been a series of empty, superficial encounters. One day, I picked up my phone and was surprised to hear a familiar voice. I hadn't spoken to Tiffany in nearly 2 years, so I guessed one of our daughters must have given her my new number. I hadn't explicitly forbidden them, but I had made it clear that I didn't need to be in touch with their mother. "Hey, Mark," she purred, her voice dripping with sweetness. "I think it's time for us to have a talk." "I thought we agreed not to speak until Grace was married," I replied flatly. "And since that hasn't happened yet, I'd rather keep things quiet." Tiffany chuckled like I'd cracked a joke. "You're still the same old Mark, trying to deny your true feelings. Deep down, I know you miss me." I shook my head, unimpressed. "You're still the same Tiffany, convinced the universe revolves around you. Listen, I don't hate you, but the past is behind us. I have no desire to go back." She let out a sigh. "I get it, you're still angry. Maybe I should have kept my affairs a secret, but that felt dishonest." "Tiffany, it was still cheating," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Telling me ahead of time didn't make it any less real. You only did it because you thought I'd never walk away. Did you really think that little of me?" "You've always had a high opinion of yourself, Mark," she said, almost as if she was testing me. "Maybe I do now," I replied calmly. "These past few years have shown me that I'm more than just the husband of a beautiful woman. Other women see my worth and actually want to reciprocate emotionally. My life is better now than I ever imagined it could be. Why would I go back to a one-sided relationship with someone who never respected me?" "Are you sure about that, Mark?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, almost pleading. "More sure than I've ever been," I answered, feeling a deep sense of closure as I ended the call. Turning to the woman beside me, I grinned. "So, ready for round 2? I asked Kelly, who flashed me a playful smile and slipped her hand into mine.